is up, and welcome back to Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers. As always, I am your host, Brandon Silvers. It is time for women's college basketball. I'm going to get you ready for that. But first, appreciate you being here. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, because I'd like for you to stick around. Let's get into it. Okay, I'm going conference by conference, previewing the teams I think will be Final Four contenders when it's all said and done. I'll remind you what they did last year, what's new this year, and what to expect, and we'll see how it all plays out. Now, unlike the SEC, who added new schools, but you see some very familiar faces at the top in terms of Final Four contenders, the Big Ten is adding new schools at a time when there are a lot of changes within the OG programs, so the new schools are expected to walk in and be at the top of the conference. Newcomer Southern Cal is the highest ranked Big Ten program in the preseason top 25 at number 3, RIP to the Pac-12. They actually won the final Pac-12 conference tournament last year on their way to a number 1 seed in the Big Dance, where they made it all the way to the Elite 8 for the first time in 30 years before losing to UConn. What changed? Well, JuJu Watkins showed up, 14 games of 30 or more points, including an absolutely unreal 51-point performance against Stanford, as she set the Division I scoring record for a freshman in a season. She's 6'2" with legitimate guard skills. To put that in perspective, Diana Taurasi is the all-time leading scorer in the W and pretty much the gold standard for explosive scoring guards, and she's 2 inches shorter, so being 6'2" with those skills gives you a significant advantage. Even scarier is you can see where JuJu has room to improve. I think she's an underrated playmaker, but there are some plays where she chooses to shoot because she's such a great scorer when the best decision would have been a pass. And there's certainly room for her shooting percentages, particularly from 3 to go up, but keep in mind too that a lot of her forced shots from last season were a consequence of not having consistently reliable scorers around her the way other stars around the country did. Well, the good news for both her and the Trojans' title chances is that that's not going to be an issue this year. Lindsey Gottlieb significantly upgraded this roster in the offseason. The big get was Stanford star Kiki Iriafen. She had a breakout season last year that earned her the Katrina McClain Award as the nation's best power forward. Charleston's own Katrina McClain, I should say, who grew up right down the street from where I was born and raised. Kiki was a monster last season, putting up 19 and 11. Her game is very much like a baby Asia Wilson's. With Stanford moving to the ACC and Coach Tara Vanderveer retiring, she decided to return home to LA to try to compete for a title. Kind of funny, where JuJu didn't have consistent scorers, particularly in the post, Kiki had the opposite issue at Stanford, where they didn't really have anybody on the perimeter who could consistently go and get a bucket. So her coming to Southern Cal solves both of their problems. And there's more. Oregon State got caught up without a conference in that Pac-12 disintegration, and almost all of their key pieces from their Elite 8 run left, including Talia van Oelhoffen, who is now a Trojan herself. I'm embarrassed to say that I only recently put it together that her dad is former Pittsburgh Steeler Kimo van Oelhoffen. How I missed that with such a unique last name, I don't know, but she's a solid all-around player who really epitomized what that Beaver team was all about. She led them in assists last year at 5 per game, and she's probably going to run the point here. She's a very good positional rebounder as well, so teams are going to have a hard time with her, JuJu, Kiki, and Raya Marshall, who we'll talk about in a second, all crashing the boards. TVO can score too. She's averaged double digits every year of her career. Her shooting percentages have dipped the past 2 seasons, especially from 3, but I know she has some injuries she played through at different times. So is that affecting it? Because the shot looks good when I see it. The free throw percentage is elite, so missing threes doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. She'll get some high quality looks this season too, with teams having to focus so much on JuJu and Kiki, so we'll see how that develops. She's also a solid defender. And it's not just the transfers, but Southern Cal also had the number 1 ranked recruiting class, according to ESPN, led by guards and McDonald's All-Americans, Kaylee Heckel and Kennedy Smith, who also has the size and versatility to score in many ways and defend multiple positions. Heckel is a true point guard who's going to back up Talia this year probably. They also have the aforementioned Raya Marshall, who will start at center. She's an Ezi Magbagorish defender. She's going to rebound. She's going to protect the paint and get blocks. She's going to get steals. Can she consistently finish in the paint on offense? She was much better last season, but she still has a way to go. This is a team that has the talent to win a national championship. JuJu and Kiki might be the best 1-2 punch in the country, but there are some concerns here. Number one is three-point shooting. They were streaky last year, and they lost their three best threats in Mackenzie Forbes, Caleb Padilla, and Taylor Bigby. Like I said, I do expect JuJu and Talia to be better here, but the rest of what they're relying on will be these freshmen they brought in. Now, number one ranked class and all that, but last year kind of spoiled us, I think, because freshmen don't always come in and pop off like that immediately. They could, don't get me wrong, but I would feel more comfortable if they had proven shooters who could spread the floor for them. On top of that, depth, particularly post depth. Behind Marshall, they have under 1,100 minutes of Division I post experience. That's fewer minutes than JuJu played all last season by herself. If Marshall's in foul trouble or needs a breather or just isn't playing like herself, what is that going to look like? And finally, point guard play. Do you need a true point guard to win a national title? No, not necessarily. Does it make it a hell of a lot easier? Yes. TVO is a fantastic player, but her natural position is probably somewhere between a point guard and a shooting guard. Heckle is a natural point guard, but again, a freshman who's probably going to be coming off the bench. Now, let me be very clear. These are not season derailing issues. As a matter of fact, they have a whole season to figure this stuff out. These are just things to pay attention to over the course of the season that could trip them up in March. But every team has issues, and Southern Cal is absolutely a Final Four team and a potential national champion. Moving on, Southern Cal is not the only Final Four contender from the Big Ten. They're not even the only Big Ten Final Four contender in LA that used to be in the Pac-12. The UCLA Bruins are ranked 5th in the preseason top 25 and look very much like a team that you could see in Tampa come March. They were a 2 seed last year and lost a disappointing one to LSU in the Sweet 16. They're led by 6'7" center Lauren Betts. She's one of my favorite players to watch in the country. She's highly skilled, fundamentally sound, and uses her frame and physicality against opponents. It's rare for a big to have all three of these things and use them the way that she does. If you're smaller than she is, and a lot of players are, she's going to bully you the way God intended. There's no fucking around. She's just going to put her body on you and go to work. She does this on both ends of the court while managing to stay out of foul trouble for the most part. She didn't foul out of any games last season and averaged just under 2 fouls per game, which means she averaged more blocked shots than fouls. Very impressive stuff. She also led them in scoring at 15 points per game while attempting just the 4th most shots on the team. That's possible when you hit 64% of the shots you take. Please do yourself a favor and watch her play. Kiki Rice is also back. She averaged 13 points, nearly 6 rebounds, and led the team at 4.5 assists per game last season. You can almost tell whether or not they won or lost simply by looking at her shooting percentages. In wins, she made 47-ish% of her shots and 35% from three. In losses, those numbers dipped to 39% from the field and 16% from three. This is a kind of chicken or the egg type deal. Are they more likely to lose when she's missing shots? Yes. Can she shoot them out of games sometimes? Also, yes. But also, she was their best shot creator. So when they were losing, she had to try to shoot them back into games. To me, this is a pivotal year in her development, which also coincides with how far they're going to end up going. She's one of those tweener scoring guards like a Zaya Cook or even a Deja Kelly who can create their own offense, but also fall into a trap of trying to do too much sometimes. We saw this at the end of that LSU loss where she basically decided it was Kiki time down the stretch and missed some easy looks and turned the ball over. If they're going to go far and if she's going to play at the next level, she's going to have to play within herself. She's going to have to create for others. She's going to have to consistently knock down threes or stop shooting so many threes. She's also going to have to reduce her turnovers. She's a very good player. She needs to operate more efficiently if she's going to become a great player. Now, she did improve a great deal between her freshman and sophomore season, so it is possible. Southern Cal got their Oregon State transfer in TVO. UCLA got one too in Tamia Gardner, a power forward who can also stretch the floor. She put up about 12 and 7, mostly off the bench for the Beavers, while hitting almost 40% of her threes. Texas A&M transfer Janiyah Barker should also start for this team. She averaged 12 and 7 in her 2 seasons for the Aggies. Doesn't shoot a ton of threes, but is about 36% for her career. A front court of her, Betts, and Gardner will vacuum up rebounds. The other guard alongside Rice will most likely be London Jones, just 5'4", but also more of a combo guard offensively. She was their best three-point shooter last season, hitting just under 37% of her 7 attempts per game. I say most likely because Charlize Ledger-Walker transferred in from Washington State, but she suffered a knee injury last season against UCLA, interestingly enough, and I haven't seen anything where she's cleared to play anytime soon. She'll be the most natural point guard on the roster whenever she can play. She's not much of a shooter, but can still score a bit. Rebounds pretty well too. Off the bench, they bring in Gabby Jaquez. She plays a similar role to the one her brother plays on the Miami Heat, where she just comes in and makes shit happen. A perfect example of what I was saying earlier about playing within yourself. I'd actually like to see her featured a little bit more, but it's a huge plus having a player like this coming off your bench. Their overall depth is pretty good, honestly, especially if Leisure Walker is able to come back. They also have talent coming in the form of the 4th-ranked recruiting class, so players like Avery Kane and Kendall Dudley, who played with Kiki in high school as well. Again, relying on freshmen is nerve-wracking, but they are one of the deeper teams in the country. The red flags are going to be when your best player is a big, especially a traditional post like Betts, can you consistently get them the ball? Also, I mentioned three-point shooting, which was not a strong point last season. Does that improve? If it does, it opens things up for both Betts and Kiki Rice's drives, and everyone's life will be that much easier. And then, of course, the Kiki Rice piece. The South Carolinas, the UConns, the Southern Cals of the world all have consistent high-level perimeter scorers. Up to this point in her career, she's been a tier or so under what those teams have. Can she close that gap? All in all, definitely a Final Four contender. Now, I do have more questions about them than some of these other schools, especially if we start talking about national championships, but the ingredients are certainly there, and there's plenty of time for Coach Corey Close to figure out the right mix. And right now, that's really it as far as Big Ten Final Four contenders, which is obviously a new thing after the Caitlin Clark run at Iowa these last 2 years. They aren't even ranked heading into the season, which does feel like a bit of an overreaction to me, even though they've lost Caitlin, Kate Martin, Gabby Marshall, and Coach Lisa Bluter. They still have a lot of pieces back, including Hannah Stolke. They also brought in Lucy Olson, who was the 3rd leading scorer in the country last season at Villanova. Certainly expecting more of a balanced attack from them this year, but that can still be very effective, sometimes more effective. They won't be competing for anything of note, but they should still make the tournament. Ohio State is the highest ranked OG Big Ten team at 14. They were a 2 seed last year and lost in the 2nd round to that scrappy Duke team. They lost JC Sheldon and Celeste Taylor to the W, but they did bring in Oregon transfer Chance Gray and top 3 recruit, depending on the source, Jelani Cambridge, to ease the pain of that. Player comps are always tough, but Cambridge is one of these freshman guards that gives me Hannah Hidalgo vibes, so please keep an eye on her. This is Cody McMahon's team, though, and they're going to go as far as she takes them. She didn't improve nearly as much as I thought she was going to from her freshman to sophomore year. In fact, she might have taken a tiny step back as teams knew how to play her. What has she added to her game? That is the question. This is not a national title contender or even Elite 8 as of right now, but can they win a game or two in the tournament? Yeah, Sweet 16 should be the goal with the hopes of building on that next season. Maryland's another potential Sweet 16 team. You should always fear a Brenda Freeze coach team. They bring a lot of their production back from last season's tournament team, including leading scorer Cheyenne Sellers. They brought in some key transfers too, like Christina Dalsey, who was Big East co-defensive player of the year last season at Villanova, Kayleen Smichael, who averaged 17 a game over 2 seasons at Rutgers, Sarah Tibiasu, who was player of the year last year in the Atlantic 10 for VCU, and Sailor Poffenbarger, who was a double-double machine for Arkansas. This is a sleeper pick for me. They have the talent and the coaching to make some noise. Ranked 18th right now, which puts them in that 4 or 5 seed range, if I'm not mistaken. But don't be shocked if they end up as a 2 or 3 seed come March. Nebraska and Indiana round out the Big Ten teams in the top 25 at 23 and 25 respectively. You can pretty much pencil in Alexis Markowski for 15 to 20 points and 10 rebounds a game for Nebraska. Curious to see how Natalie Potts improves on an impressive freshman campaign. And they have a freshman they are excited about this year in guard Britt Prince. The Hoosiers lost a lot from last year's Sweet 16 team that put a scare into the Gamecocks, only losing by 4, but Coach Terry Morin just keeps them on track, and they are looking for their 10th straight 20-win season. They had 4 total before she got here. So yeah, a lot of good hoops in the Big Ten this year. Things are going to be a bit different with the players they lost and bringing in these new teams, but it should be fun to watch and see how everyone adjusts. If I had to bet, you'll be seeing at least one of these teams in Tampa. Now, the Big 12 has kind of gotten lost in the shuffle with everything else going on in the college basketball world, but they have a couple of teams that are right on the cusp of being potential Final Four teams, starting with the 8th ranked Iowa State Cyclones. The Cyclones were a 7 seed last year and picked up a win against Maryland, where Audie Crooks dropped 40 on a near perfect 18 of 20 shooting before they lost in overtime to 2 seed Stanford in the second round. Crooks and Addie Brown both had fantastic freshman seasons last year, with Crooks averaging 19 and 8 and Brown averaging 13, 8 and 5 assists. Expectations were lower heading into last season as the Cyclones had lost a lot of talent, but they didn't skip a beat with these two. Brown started from the jump. As you can guess from her numbers, she's incredibly versatile and has range out to the three-point line, where she hit 41% in conference games and 39% overall. That ability to stretch the floor makes her the perfect complement to Crooks, who punishes opponents in the paint. As for Crooks, she came off the bench the first 4 games of the season, then started the rest of the way. She's a really intriguing player, and I'm interested to see how teams play her this season. First of all, she struggles from the free throw line. So at what point do teams go straight hack-a-shack with her and force her to prove she can make them? Secondly, length really gave her a hard time last season. Perfect example is that Stanford game. Again, coming off 40 points on 18 of 20 shooting, but Stanford had Cam Brink, who made a lot of players' lives hell, and Kiki Iriafen, who was the best power forward in the nation, and Crooks shot 3 for 21 that game. Obviously, that has to improve moving forward. She's got to figure out how to use her positioning and angles better, but we've seen the potential for both her and Brown, and that's why a lot of people, myself included, are high on this team. They also bring back Emily Ryan, who led them in assists per game at a shade under 7. She missed the beginning of the season due to injury, so she didn't play enough games to qualify, but that would have put her at tied for 3rd in the nation. She's also a great positional rebounder and a knockdown three-point shooter at 43-ish%. I'd actually like her to take her volume up a bit, as she attempted just 2.5 per game. Speaking of three-point shooting, they also brought in Lily Hansford from Oregon State. All the cool teams have an Oregon State transfer this year. She came off the bench for the Beavers last year and hit 45% of her threes and gave South Carolina hell in that Elite 8 matchup by knocking down 4 of them. Ariana Jackson should once again provide some three-point shooting too. She was also a freshman last season and was one of the better defenders in the conference on the perimeter, while also being a 41% three-point shooter. So a lot of talent here, a lot of young talent in particular, so the future's bright, but we're talking about this season. What are my concerns? Last season, they turned the ball over too much. Crooks, Brown, and Ryan combined for nearly 10 turnovers per game between the 3 of them. You just can't do that and expect to make deep runs in the tournament where every possession counts. Also, they don't have a ton of length to throw at opposing bigs. If they run into a Lauren Betts or whoever in the tournament, they could have a very long night. And just in general, I think they lack the overall talent of some of these other teams I have ahead of them. They're going to have to execute at a high level and have some things break their way. However, if we are here in March previewing a Final Four matchup with them in it, I don't think we'll need a fainting couch or anything. It's certainly within the realm of possibility. Who else could join them? You got a couple of teams sitting right there at 12 and 13 in Baylor and Kansas State. Will they get to enjoy the Tampa Riverwalk? The Bears made a Sweet 16 run last season and were actually leading in the fourth quarter against Southern Cal before losing. They had a very balanced attack with 7 players averaging between 7 and 12 points per game, and I'm expecting more of the same this year. They return the bulk of that scoring and will be a really experienced team as a result, led by three-time All-Big 12 selection Sarah Andrews. They also add Aaronette Vonleh from Colorado, who is a very skilled scorer in the post. Now, at first glance, to me, this is going to be a very scrappy team, a tough team to beat, but I'm going to have to see it to believe it as far as a Final Four run is concerned. For starters, they're pretty undersized across the board, and none of the players who are returning hit the three consistently enough to make up for that. Now, they do rebound better than they should, which speaks to their scrappiness, but I worry about them defending opposing bigs, and I worry about other teams clogging the paint against them defensively. They're going to play hard and make you beat them, but they don't have quite enough talent, size, or three-point shooting for me to feel comfortable talking about them with the UCLAs or South Carolinas of the world. What about Kansas State? Well, they do have a dominant big in Ayoka Lee. I expected her to be on the Atlanta Dream, but she decided to come back to school. She set the single game scoring record a couple of years ago with 61 points against Oklahoma. As you can imagine, her name is all up and down Kansas State's record books. 20 points, 9 rebounds, 3 blocks, and a steal per game last year. They are ahead of the game there, and with point guard Serena Sundell, she hit an incredible 54% of her shots from the field and 40% from three last season. She did have an odd dip in her free throw percentage, which I don't like to see from point guards, but that could just have been a fluke. She also averaged nearly 6 assists per game. So throughout these previews, I've been talking about bigs and point guards with all of these teams, and Kansas State's got them. The concerns come in when we start talking about their overall talent level, particularly when it comes to offense. This is a very impressive defensive team. You've got Lee as the last line of defense and a whole host of perimeter defenders, including twin sisters Jalen and Briley Glenn, to make life hell for other teams. But what happens when teams go all in on shutting down Lee? Tamara Poindexter is expected to provide some relief as she put up 20 a game last year for Tulsa, but I worry about teams like this who are always in lower scoring games because it allows teams to keep things close, and even lesser talented teams can steal one. The lack of scoring hurt them in last year's tournament when they lost to Colorado in the second round while scoring just 50 points. Lee took just 9 shots, and Sundell was pressured into 9 turnovers, and that was that. It wasn't like Colorado was lighting it up offensively themselves as they hit just 35% of their shots, but they won by 13 as the Wildcats managed just 15 second half points. Whenever you have a player of Lee's caliber and a point guard like Sundell, you have a chance, especially with their team defense. So they could make a run, but I need to see some consistent offensive production from the others before I write that in pen. But it is certainly a possibility. However, that's where I'm going to draw the line for Big 12 Final Four contenders. Number 16, West Virginia will certainly be fun to watch. JJ Quinterly is a hooper, but I don't think they have quite enough to make that deep of a run in March. Again, all of this is subject to change, but as of now, I don't see it. But this is going to be a fun conference to watch, and I think they've really flown under the radar with everything else going on. I mean, look at TCU. I don't know how good they're going to be, but the name recognition will be off the charts with everyone they brought in. Haley Van Lith, Maddie Scher from Kentucky, Donovan Hunter from Oregon State, Sedona Prince is back somehow, Madison Connor's back. A lot of firepower there. Make sure to tap into some games. Also, subscribe to my weekly sports watch guide if you need help deciding which ones to watch. The link is in the show notes, and it is super entertaining if I say so myself. Also, be sure to check out my previews of other conferences in the women's hoops world. We're looking at all the Final Four contenders from everywhere. This will do it for this preview, though. Appreciate you watching, listening, rating, subscribing, reviewing, and sharing. As always, and I will catch you later.